we approach the NHL trade deadline coming up here February the 25th, there is all kinds of new trade chatter floating around the NHL. In today's video, we're talking about the Edmonton Oilers, the Calgary Flames, the Columbus Blue Jackets, the Florida Panthers, the Colorado Avalanche, and the New York Rangers, as well as the Boston Bruins. We'll get into all that coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top today, we have a lot of NHL teams that have a lot of trade chatter surrounding them due to the NHL trade deadline coming up soon and a lot of big decisions to be made. So let's jump right in here as we have a lot to cover. I want to get started with the Edmonton Oilers. Now they're preparing to activate defenseman Andrej Sekera, who's been on a conditioning stint in the American Hockey League. They are trying to extend that conditioning stint by another game or two if they can to kind of buy themselves some more time, as they need to clear some cap space and a roster spot for him with the NHL club here. Now it's been believed that the defensemen that they acquired earlier this year, Manning and Petrovic, are both being attempted to be moved here, and they haven't had any luck. So it looks as though both players likely won't be sticking around with the Oilers for much longer if they have their way. If they can't do that, they very well might put them on waivers and be able to send them to the minors and bury some salary that way. That is a possibility as well. But both those defensemen that Peter Chiarelli acquired earlier before he was let go are attempted being moved here. So we'll see what happens with the Oilers, but they need to get Sekera back into the lineup. He's a much more important player than the other two guys. Obviously, they've been without him for a lot this season, and as they're trying to make a final push here to get into a wild card spot and get into the playoffs, they're going to want him in their lineup. So they need to figure out something. Now, it's also been believed that they very well might be showcasing goaltender Cam Talbot as of late. He's had 3 straight starts. As we know, he's a pending UFA. He's a guy that they'd like to move out as well after they signed Koskinen to that fairly long-term, fairly expensive contract, especially for a guy who's not a bona fide starter as of yet. But it looks like he is going to be given every opportunity to be that starter moving forward. So with Talbot getting a lot of playing time lately, some people do think that it's a bit of a showcase to try to get him traded to another team and kind of get some interest going in the player. Now, of course, we've had speculation before from the fourthperiod.com indicating that they felt that there was a bit of a trade market for Talbot and somebody would pick him up. There was a handful of teams in the Eastern Conference that were showing some interest. So we'll see. Maybe the Oilers will get lucky and be able to get a trade for him here before the NHL deadline. But either way, they need to do something sooner than later to get Sekera back into their lineup and try to make a push here for the playoffs. Of course, we don't know a lot of the stuff going on with the Ottawa Senators pending unrestricted free agents like Stone and Duchesne, Dzingel. Ottawa's still trying to work out contract extensions with all of them. According to their GM, Pierre Dorion, they'd like to keep all 3 and are actively negotiating to try to make that happen. But of course, here as we approach the deadline, if they're not signed, there is a possibility that they could be traded. We talked before about Mark Stone and the link possibly to the Winnipeg Jets. They would have interest should he become available. But another team you can throw into the mix as well is the Calgary Flames. Flames are having a pretty solid year. Lately, they've kind of slipped a little bit. They certainly wouldn't mind adding to their forward group for the playoffs. Hard to say what the price tag would be. It might prove to be too expensive. But of course, Mark Stone's brother Michael plays for the Flames on defense as well. So probably would be a good fit for him, at least on a short-term basis, should they decide to move him. But if he is available, you can throw the Flames into the mix as another team that would be interested. But I do think he's a player that would gain a lot of attention. He arguably would be one of the top players on the potential trade bait board here should they go down that road. He's such a versatile, solid all-around forward who can provide a lot for the team. Jumping over to talk about the Boston Bruins here quickly. Unfortunately, David Pastrnak, who is arguably their top offensive player, is down with an injury now for a minimum of 2 weeks. Likely going to be 3 to 4 in my opinion. He had some kind of a thumb injury after attending a Bruins event. He had a slip and fall type of accident, I guess. Hurt his thumb, had to have some kind of a surgery, and it will be reevaluated in 2 weeks' time. Now, in my opinion, David Pastrnak is incredibly important. He really drives the offense for that team quite a bit. I mean, Bergeron and Marchand are very important and play a big part in it as well. But Pasternak's kind of that catalyst, that go-to guy for the big goal when they need him. And for a team that's already kind of been struggling with secondary scoring and have been speculated to be, kind of looking to make some upgrades for the playoffs, this really puts them in a little bit of a pickle, in my opinion. It might accelerate their plans to maybe make an acquisition. Now, of course, according to Don Sweeney, the general manager of the Bruins, that's not going to impact his trade plans for the deadline at all. This injury is not going to have any kind of impact that way, he says. But for a team that's, trying to make sure they hang on here, not only get into the playoffs, but try to get in one of those top 3 spots, potentially get a home ice advantage. I mean, that's going to prove to be difficult here with the way that the Leafs and the Habs are playing. But they need to make some kind of move. Now, I mentioned the other day that they might be linked to Ilya Kovalchuk because they were the next in line, basically, in signing him as a free agent this past offseason. Obviously, things haven't gone well in LA, and he likely would be available to waive his no-trade clause for certain teams, and the Bruins might be one of them. I know based on the comments in that video, many Bruins fans that follow this channel certainly were not too pleased with the idea and would prefer a different type of player to come in, and I don't blame you. And I know that after last year's Rick Nash acquisition, it seems like Don Sweeney might be a little gun-shy to spend big on another big-time player to come in to the Bruins here as a rental. So we'll see what happens here, but the Bruins need to make some kind of move, and with Pastrnak going down, that certainly could impact their season here. They have a lot of big games in the next 2 to 3, 4 weeks while he's potentially out, and it very well could have a big impact here. So keep your eye on the Boston Bruins. It would not surprise me if they kind of try to get ahead of the deadline and made some kind of acquisition here for a scoring forward sooner than later. Outside of players like Kovalchuk and even Panarin to an example, I mean, I know the Bruins have had interest in Panarin. We've kind of had some links there in the past as well, but I just think that price tag might prove to be too high. Some other more reasonable players that they could look at include a couple guys from the Minnesota Wild, which would be Charlie Coyle and Eric Stahl, even Jakob Silfverberg in Anaheim as well. I know the Ducks do want to keep Silfverberg. They're trying to sign him, and apparently the issue there, that the reason he's not signed as of yet, is more about term than dollars, according to Elliot Friedman. So we'll see if it comes down to the fact that they have to trade him. Then it certainly would be an excellent fit for the Boston Bruins, in my opinion. He could provide that top 6, top 9 type of winger who can score, and he's a very solid two-way player, very responsible that way as well. So keep your eye on the Bruins. Like I said, there's some other guys here outside of the bigger names that they very well could make a move for that wouldn't cost as much, but still have a fair bit of impact on them while Pastrnak is out and moving into the playoffs. Now jumping over to the Columbus Blue Jackets and their big conundrum here with Artemi Panarin and Sergei Bobrovsky. Right now it's believed that the Florida Panthers obviously have a ton of interest. We've talked about this a few times, but it is believed that it's quite a possibility that the Panthers might try to acquire Panarin, and then whatever assets the Blue Jackets get, that they would then turn around and try to flip those assets in return for another top player. And apparently they do have interest in Matt Duchene. So if Duchene ends up on the trade market as well, it's apparently he's a player that they do have interest in, according to some of the NHL insiders. But of course, at this point, he would also be a rental. I'm not really sure that would make sense for the Blue Jackets. I mean, for them to trade Panarin, who's basically a rental, and then to acquire another, fairly significant scorer who's also a rental, just seems kind of weird to me. It would make more sense just to kind of stand pat and keep Panarin and take your chances in the offseason of keeping him, which do appear to be thin. But, at the same time, there's been some rumblings under the Florida Panthers organization that they very well might be trying to clear more space in order to make the big acquisitions either now or at the summertime. Well, obviously, we saw the deal they made with the Penguins, trading McCann and Bukestad, which didn't really, free up that much space because of what they brought in. But everything they brought in was, for the most part here, on expiring contracts, like Derek Brassard, for example. And, for example, it's been rumored that they might even be willing to include a guy like Jonathan Huberdeau or even a Mike Hoffman, who's, Hoffman's only got this year and one more year on his contract, where Huberdeau signed longer term. Of course, Hoffman's a few years older than Huberdeau, but either way, both of those guys would prove to be, a pretty good scorer for just about any team around the league. Now, some sources around kind of don't think that Huberdeau would be traded, but at the same time, I wouldn't put anything past Dale Tellin and the Panthers. They seem to be very aggressive going after Panarin and Bobrovsky, and if they feel like they need to move out one longer-term obligation contract to make that happen, then they very well might make it happen with one of those two players. I mean, both are having pretty solid seasons, but it certainly would be nice acquisitions for other teams. So if we saw a deal from the Panthers to the Jackets, for example, with like a Derek Brassard, a James Reimer, and either a Hoffman or a Huberdeau, that probably would be enough to get it done. That would make more sense, in my opinion, for the Blue Jackets to acquire a player with term so they can get at least one or more seasons beyond this year, instead of taking the chance of losing Panarin for nothing. So there is a lot of speculation that the Panthers might be looking to clear more salary, so keep your eye on that. If it's not with Columbus, it could be with another team trying to make this happen to prepare themselves for the offseason. Now, it's been believed for quite some time now that Andre Burakovsky of the Washington Capitals has kind of fallen out of favor, and that he very well would be one of the few players they'd be looking to trade before going into the playoffs, before the deadline, trying to go back-to-back here on the Stanley Cup win, obviously, last year, trying to defend that championship successfully. And it's been believed now that the Colorado Avalanche have been kind of kicking tires, have some interest in this player. The Avalanche are a team who's been on a fairly bad losing streak lately. Their top line, McKinnon, Renton, and Landeskog, as solid as they've been all year, provide the bulk of the scoring. Their secondary scoring has not been really all that very good this year. They really are in desperate need of some upgrades in those areas, and they haven't really been playing poorly or cooled off, but they've been just a little bit more normal instead of their really high level of play, and that's really hurt the Avalanche big time. Goaltending obviously hasn't been great as well. Grubauer and Varlamov haven't been very solid as of late either. So when you combine the lack of scoring with the not so great performance in goal, kind of makes for some bad results, and that's what they've been experiencing lately. They've fallen out of the playoff picture, but it's not impossible to get back in here, and it wouldn't be too shocking of a deal here to see them go after some secondary scoring. And Burakovsky would probably fit that mold nicely. He's still young enough that they could mold him in potentially to a second or third line scorer like he was projected to be once he was first drafted and came up to the NHL. So we'll see what happens. I don't expect too big of deals out of the Avalanche, but making a more minor acquisition for a guy like Burakovsky, they could certainly move maybe one of their struggling forwards in exchange for that as well, because it's been known that the Capitals likely are going to want a roster player back in return. That's very well the type of deal we very well just might see here by the deadline. And lastly, I want to touch on the New York Rangers and their pending UFAs, Kevin Hayes and Matt Zuccarello. As of right now, we have led to believe that there's been no contract extensions with either player right now between GM Jeff Gordon and their representation. So it is looking more and more likely that they will be moved. We've discussed numerous times that there's all kinds of interest in both players. They both kind of serve different purposes, but teams like Calgary and Winnipeg, for example, Calgary's been linked to Zuccarello. Hayes could be that big number 2 center that the Jets are looking for. But again, as mentioned by Darren Dreger, the Jets very well might be content going into the playoffs with Brian Little as that number 2 center. They might opt to add a winger as well, which kind of linked the the connection to Mark Stone should he be available. So either way, I do think that the Jets do make a move. That first round pick is likely going to be in play, likely does get traded, and Hayes would be an excellent fit. But there's lots of other teams out there that for both of these players to be key contributors to in the playoffs for different reasons. And with the lack of contract talks, I don't see the Rangers not trading them to risk losing them for nothing here in the offseason. If they don't intend to sign him, they will be moved. This rebuild will continue. And another player as well that could be moved for, probably like a mid to late round draft pick would be Adam McQuaid on defense, obviously. He was acquired from the Bruins at the beginning of the season. And it seems as though the Rangers have been fairly happy with his play. And it was noted by the insiders that if he is traded, that it wouldn't be a complete shocker to see him re-sign with the Rangers during the offseason. So we'll see what happens, but there's all kinds of teams always looking for that depth defenseman, especially somebody like McQuaid, who's been around the blocks, got some experience, and obviously got a lot of playoff runs with the Bruins in his past. So he could be a very well key, valuable member, like I said, as a depth piece to many teams down the stretch here. So we'll see what happens, but I do expect the Rangers to be very active between now and February the 25th. So, of course, as always, I want to hear your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section on all these potential moves that we very well might see. Give me your best mock trades for some of the players that are expected to be traded, and we can continue the conversation in the comment section. If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up before you go. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.